you're not meant to be in here. Jimmy had knocked, reluctantly, on Mr. Barrow's door. Absent-mindedly, Milo turned the key and opened it onto an astounded first footman. Behind her, Thomas was still asleep. That had woken her up, being surprised by Jimmy, and she looked past him, frantically, worried now. He's asleep, Milo told him. Can you help me carry this lot back? Jimmy looked past her, seeing the bowls and cups. But he stated past her, and the stuttering rise and fall of Thomas's body, still in pain even though he was asleep. You were here all night. Milo stepped past him and onto the corridor. Yes, she replied. Nothing inappropriate happened. Jimmy looked past her once more, then sighed. Course I'll give yer a hand. I'm here to say sorry, he told her. Tell Thomas, not me, Milo said. And if you don't intend to be his friend, tell him. It will be easier on him. But don't hate him for finding you attractive. He is a person first, before he is a man. Jimmy looked down, shame touching him for a moment. You are a good person, Milo, he told her, and reached for her hand. She moved it out of the way. Jimmy's face gave a quick stab of indignation, and then he smiled. I also tried to find you to say sorry, he told Milo. I was daft and ... he paid for it instead of me ... instead of you. Can I count you as a friend too? Only if you come back later, don't wake him up now. We were talking until quite early. Jimmy bowed his head. Let me get these, he told Milo, and swiftly collected the bowls and glasses. Milo picked up the water jug. One more condition, Milo said, as they crept down the back stairs. Can you show me that game you were playing? Edna Braithwaite passed them between the gallery and the second floor. They continued down, and she gave them both a lingering look. Poker? Yes. Have you never played before? Jimmy asked. He didn't want to have to nurse her or pick up the tears when she lost. No, but I have a few shillings, Milo told him. Jimmy looked down the corridor. He had some minutes, and they slipped into the boot room. Me too, he told her, closing the door behind him and extracting a pack of cards from his waistcoat. Bring it on. 88,888,888. Later that afternoon, Thomas struggled down the stairs to see Jimmy hanging his head at the vision of his pile of money disappearing. He leaned against the servants' dining room doorway, watching his new friend. He was so pleased Jimmy had come to him, was the bigger person to thank him for stepping in, and also for his help with Milo. And Thomas had been unusually honest, and trusted him a little, admitting he still had feelings for Jimmy. So he now had a fright for letting his guard down, a friend that he made his heart race a little, for he still rather fancied him. Now, Thomas's friend was nursing his head, whereas Milo was sat straight and still, studying the reverse of the cards. Daisy and Alfred and Ivy were watching, enjoying the usually cocky Jimmy brought down a peg or two. I just can't believe it, he told the others. I just can't. Jimmy looked disbelievingly across to Milo. And you've really never played before? No, Milo replied. She's counting the cards, Jimmy. Thomas smiled. Immediately, Milo looked up, her face beaming. It fell a little when she took in his injuries. Thomas. She stood up, her chair falling back, and raised a hand at his wife's enthusiasm, for she was, he suspected, about to try to grab him in an embrace. He noticed the expression on his colleagues' faces. Where is she? Thomas asked. Edna. Upstairs. Why? Said Daisy. Because she was right, though where she heard it from is up for debate. Not me, said Daisy, imploringly. Thomas shook his head. Not you, he smiled at her, pityingly. A poor girl, last in her family, sent out to work at 12 because of poverty, providing wages for her parents until they died of exhaustion themselves. Milo gave Thomas a little insulation from a world that hated him, and he noticed he was seeing things differently for the first time in his life. Married? Asked Jimmy again. Milo had told him, but it didn't seem real. In fact, it sounded like a line he had heard once too often if he were going too fast with a girl. Yes, we are married, Thomas said, smiling to Milo. In fact it were a year ago yesterday, in Scotland, if you must know, ye nosy beggars. You are what? Carson's voice, already sergeant major-like, and ears had picked up this confirmation. He stood in the doorway, seeming to fill it. Milo shrank back a little, but Thomas took her hand and held it. Ivy nudged Daisy, and pointed. "Married, Mr. Carson," said Thomas Barrow, smugly. "As you very well know, Lucina has graduated from university and has been requested by the preeminent scientists of our time, Professor the Lord Ernest Rutherford, to work in his research team at Cambridge University." Thomas looked to the table, jerking his head in a gesture of dismissiveness. "This is like counting sheep for my wife," he went, proudly, "so I suggest you don't play her again if you want to keep hold of your money, Jimmy." "I won't," said Jimmy Kent, and looked across to Milo. "No offense, Miss Ashby, I mean, Miss Lucina. Mrs. Barrow." Ivy tittered. Daisy nudged her. Alfred nodded his head, deferring to the wife of one of his superiors. Yes, I think that will take us all done getting used to," concluded Carson, frowning at his staff for sloping off to watch a gambling game. He stepped over the threshold, holding Milo's gaze with his own stern one for a moment. "The family know Lord Grantham accepts it. Now, it to be hoped that now the gossip will stop and we can all get on with our work." But the telephone bell began to ring, and stopped almost immediately as someone answered it. Then Mrs. Hughes hurried into them, looking round her idle servants and cards and Milo and Thomas Barrow. "It's Lady Mary," she told Carson. "She's on the next train. She's in labor." "What?" "She's going straight to the hospital. Anna is coming back here for her hospital bag and the family are coming back from Donegal early." "Early," Carson repeated. Then he looked to the staff. "Well, you heard Mrs. Hughes. We need to make ready for their return." "Labor?" Milo asked, as Jimmy cleared away the cards and Alfred started to get down the polish and brushes for the shoes. "She's having a baby," said Daisy, hurrying to the kitchen. "A baby?" Milo asked. "Yes, you know," said Thomas, "small human, cries, eats, sleeps." Milo looked up to him. "Ah, a joke." She smiled back. "But Daisy wasn't finished yet. Didn't you see her, when you got here? When she took you to see Mr. Matthew and she called for tea?" Milo stared at her. "All round in the tummy?" Milo raised her eyebrows. This was way outside of any of her zones of comfort. Her mind caught up with her thoughts. "She's going to have a baby, here?" Milo asked as frantic activity continued. "No, in the hospital, "Yer daft happeneth," put in Mrs. Patmore, beckoning for Daisy. "After Lady Sybil died?" Milo asked Daisy as she passed, her voice low. The young woman, though so different to Milo, modeled the social mores for her by putting her finger to her lips and hissing A-S-H. "You get back to bed, Mr. Barrow," Mr. Carson told her. "You shouldn't even be up in the first place." Thomas looked to the butler, and it seemed he was about to argue. So Carson looked firmly at Milo. "Mrs. Barrow, now you are officially part of the household, pro tem, until Lordship tells us otherwise. Can you manage to help him back to bed?" "I'll help," said Jimmy and Alfred together, as Thomas made to protest. Mr. Carson looked between the two footmen. "A much better idea," he said. "Just get back down immediately so we can prepare for the family when they return." "Daisy," Mrs. Patmore called again. "Pastry, pies." "Come on," said Daisy, taking Milo's hand. "You can help me. And you can tell me all about the people you work with, and what you do at university." "Come and visit," Milo said to her friend, as Daisy passed the bowl of flour and fat for her to do the rubbing in. "So you can meet them for yourself." "I couldn't," Daisy began. Then she heard the words of Mr. Mason, about taking as many chances as she could, because William was no longer alive to enjoy them. "Really? To university?" "Cambridge," Milo elaborated, getting the pastry mix everywhere. "I'd not know what to say," Daisy told her, then saw the mess. "Fingertips," she told Milo. "Go and wash your hands, cold water pastry don't like hot hands." And when Milo returned to the pastry, with a better technique, Daisy leaned near her ear and asked, "Who do you think is the best looking?" "Daisy, leave the poor girl alone and let her help you, will you?" said Mrs. Patmore, putting out the greased tins on the center of the table. And all the while Edna Braithwaite remained in the corridor, tea still in hand, eavesdropping everything. Then, she thought to the night before. One kiss. That was all he was giving. She shook her head and glanced at her own reflection in the hall mirror. She would have to show Tom Branson he could do much better than that. 88,888,888. Lady Mary had made it to the hospital and the family had just arrived home. It was always chaotic when they did, for the transition to serving them, as well as dealing with their traveling belongings, felt chaotic. But he had a good staff, all in all, and everything was always done, eventually, apologies given when not. "There's a phone call for you, Mr. Carson," called Mrs. Hughes, answering the butler's telephone for the third time of ringing. "Tell them I'm busy, take a message." "It's a man from Cambridge University," Mrs. Hughes called. "He is asking for you personally." Charles Carson sighed. He would have to take it, of course. It was probably something to do with the event that girl had a hand in. So many times people called to speak to him, years sometimes, after visiting. "Good afternoon, Downton Abbey." Carson the butler speaking. "How may I help you, Dr. Chadwick?" James Chadwick's voice was crackly and sounded far away, but he spoke in a clear, staccato voice, and Carson had to concentrate to understand what the man was saying. "You have Ashby with you," he told Mr. Carson. Not a question, Carson thought. "We do," he confirmed. "And your lordship has agreed that she can stay with you until October," Chadwick went on. "What?" Carson exclaimed. Then remembered that it was true. His mind was not altogether on anything except Lady Mary and the child she was in the process of having. Mr. Matthew would be there, waiting. They were all waiting. "We have made excellent progress in assembling the accelerator and the cathode ray tubes," Chadwick went on. "And, to cut to the chase, Mr. Carson, the professor and I need Ashby back as soon as humanly possible." "The professor?" "Professor Rutherford," Chadwick confirmed. "When?" "Tomorrow," he told Carson, who was disappointed in himself that a man such as Ernest Rutherford, knighted, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, was calling to ask for the young woman who had unfailingly been an irritant to Carson's life whenever she had been at Downton. Today, if at all possible. She has the professor's address. She is to be living with the Rutherfords, as she did when they were in Manchester. I see, Carson told him, taking up a pen and noting the address, listening to the confidence this man had for the contrary difficult girl that was the Melusina of his experience. Meanwhile, Milo was in the garden, and was called over by Mrs. Crawley, who was walking with her son, trying to calm his nerves, down the formal garden lines. "Hello, Milo," Mrs. Crawley said. "Can I call you that?" "Yes," Milo agreed. "You can." Matthew glanced at his mother. "And may she?" he put in, Milo's need for specific language amusing him and taking his mind off the birth. "We are happy to say that Lady Mary has had the baby," Mrs. Crawley continued. "Matthew too," she added. "I am pleased you are so happy," Milo told her. Mrs. Crawley smiled. "You look happy too, Milo," she added. "I am. I have made friends here, and university. Though, if I return, I do fear I have nowhere to stay." "Of course, you wish to see the lease arrangement," Matthew told her. "I do beg your pardon, I have it." "You may see it when you please. Come to Crawley House," he added. "And you may stay with me, Milo," Mrs. Crawley told her again as Alfred approached them. He acknowledged Isabel Crawley and Matthew, before bringing Milo to one side. "Tell me again?" she asked, after hearing Alfred tell her what Carson had told him to tell her. Then, she turned Mrs. Crawley, beginning to break into a run, and called, "Goodbye, Mrs. Crawley. Thank you for all your kindness. And you, Mr. Crawley." "I have to go now." 88,888,888. So the next person Milo saw was Thomas, dashing past Anna, who tutted her disapproval at her because Milo had nudged belongings needed for Lady Mary from her hands. That Milo noticed she had been chided for her clumsiness was rare, and she turned to Anna and called a sorry to her, as she took the back stairs two at a time. Edna, who had seen her coming, put her back to the wall as Milo totally ignored her, and she displayed no compunction to restrain herself from opening Thomas's door. "Thomas, sitting up and leafing through a book, raised his head when he saw his wife all lighted up and told him that she was to leave that day. "Sit," he told her, firmly, for Milo was flitting about like a butterfly in the height of summer. "Now," he added, "I can never understand what you're saying when you're bouncing around like this." Milo sat, her pulse racing. Today, she must remember to pack all her work, and if some of her clothes didn't fit in her case, that wouldn't matter, would it? And Milo felt Thomas's steady stare on the side of her face and slowly moved her own to look at him. He held her hands. "I am so proud of you, little Milo," Thomas told her, and was shocked to find that he genuinely meant it. Ernest's little sister, living out his life for him. No, he corrected himself, living it for herself. If Ernest were alive now, Thomas hoped that the man he had loved with all his heart would approve of what he had done to look after me, Lucina. "It's all going to be different from now on, isn't it?" "Yes," he nodded, and saw her face change, crumpling in on itself as the realization of what she had said hit her. "But," Milo began. "But?" Thomas asked her, keeping hold of her hands. "There is no but. I'll be here, whenever you need me. And if not here, somewhere." Milo had given him that financial security. His reasons for remaining at Downton were entirely codependent. He thrived in his position, the emotional security of hierarchy, which meant he had a place, which meant he fitted there, and meant he fitted somewhere. "Please," Milo asked, "come to see me when you can. Write to me." "I will," Thomas told her, and smiled. "It's you who forgets to write." And he put an arm to her back and pulled her closer to him, and she placed the side of her head onto his chest. "Your life begins now," he told her hair, and Milo clung to him closely. Thomas winced. It would take weeks for his injuries to heal properly. Why had he done it? For a pretty face? He was a sucker for a pretty face. Enough of that now. "Mrs. Barrow," called Carson, who had followed Milo up the stairs and stood and bellowed along the men's corridor. Milo sprung off Thomas's bed, but stood there for a moment, as if she were trying to remember something she wanted to tell him. "Miss Ashby," Carson insisted, and she bent, automatically, and kissed Thomas on the cheek. Then she flew across his room and along the corridor, past a startled Mr. Carson, down the stairs and down more, forgetting to use the back stairs. Milo whipped past Robert, and made him drop his newspaper, Edith gasping a giggle as she saw her wave a hand and call, "Sorry," with Cora gasping and then laughing as she saw Milo race past and double back, going down the servants' steps. Milo passed Daisy on the stairs and flew past her, turned back and grabbed her, pulling her in for a rare embrace. "Milo," Daisy called, shocked. But Milo did not stop, and turned the corner of the staircase, pushing open the door of the under-housekeeper's room, and began to turn things out of her wardrobe and onto her desk. The sound of feet made Milo look up. "You ran off, Miss Ashby," Mrs. Barrow, Alfred told her, and Milo felt, as she always did when Alfred was speaking to her, that she was being lightly told off. "I can help," he added, and stepped past her room, footman-like qualities coming to the fore, and began by upending her case and beginning by rolling up her clothes more efficiently. "You can place those things in the middle," Alfred told her, looking at her papers. "There's plenty of space now," but then regretted his words and saw the clothes hanging in her wardrobe, the blue dress, once Lady Sybil's, at the front. "Will you give Mrs. Hughes this?" she asked Alfred. Her eyes lit up as she spoke. "A fiver?" Alfred said, in disbelief. "Please," begged Milo. "Then she can send me on the rest." And on a blank piece of paper, Milo wrote down the Rutherfords' address. As Alfred nestled more things into her case, Milo paused in her holding of more papers, looking at them, and back to him, as she realized what she was holding. It was the letter that Mr. Sparks had given to her. The one to her father. She must have put it on her desk intending to read it again. Milo tore open the envelope, and read the words, and read them again. It was from Ernest. Occurring to the date, her brother had written to their father the day before he died. Chadwick had been with him, she knew. Her heart leapt, for she knew now that, no matter how much time had passed, nearly 3 years, that there was only one person to whom the content would matter. She let out a little scream. Alfred turned to her with a jump, and at the door came a concerned Mrs. Hughes. "Whatever is it, me Lucina? And why on earth are you packing in such a hurry?" She looked at Alfred, who dipped his head and made a tempered departure, pressing the white 5-point note into the housekeeper's hand. "It's the professor," Milo gabbled. "He wants me to come back immediately." "Alfred helped me pack." "So I can see," said Mrs. Hughes. "And what is this?" But Milo didn't answer. Clutching instead the late-arriving letter, she pushed on the door and past Mrs. Hughes, taking the back stairs right back up to the rafters. Thomas was in the process of getting dressed and pulled his shirt to himself when the door opened. She stopped when she saw the bruises all over his chest and back, but her desire for him to see the contents of the letter overcame her shock at his brutal injuries. "What's this?" he asked, looking at the envelope. Milo saw Thomas give a start when he saw the handwriting. "It came for my father. It was delayed," Milo explained. "It's from Ernest, dated the day before he had died." "Milo, this isn't mine," Thomas told her, and tried to push the letter back into his wife's hands. But Milo folded her arms, a childish trick, and shook her head. She had opened it because it had been addressed to Mr. Harold Ashby, but its intended destination was irrelevant now. For the contents were only now relevant to Milo's dearest friend, who had given her a future, who had stood up for a friend, who had loved her brother as a man might love a woman, or as a woman might love a man. "It can only be for you," she ventured on. "Please, don't read it until I've gone," she added. "Then you can be alone with him one last time." Milo, turning to go, was about to cross his bedroom again when Thomas caught her arm, and drew her to him. What would it be like if he had wanted to love a woman? She was pretty enough. But then, he would have been different. And men not like him did not like women like Milo, and if she were different, she would not be Milo, who made his heart was joyful when she was just being herself. "See you soon, me Lucina," Thomas Barrow whispered near her ear. "Now, go, otherwise you'll miss that bloody train and Rutherford will never have you." But Milo's eyes widened as she tried to protest. "And don't start with that, time is relative idea." "While that might be true, I don't think the message has arrived to the timetablers." Milo smiled, appreciating the jest. "Goodbye," she said to Thomas, as he let go of her arm. Milo was at the door when she turned and smiled to him. When she realized her husband was watching her go, Milo raced to him, throwing her arms around him, in the sort of hug she used to give him when she was little and her brother's friend was there for her. "Here you are," Mrs. Hughes said, when Milo finally made it back downstairs. "Alfred's told me, and now I know," she said, smiling. "Good luck to you, me Lucina," she added. "Are you really walking all that way to the village with your case?" asked Daisy, looking doubtful. Milo stared at her in surprise. "Why not?" she thought. "Do you want a car?" Mrs. Hughes asked. "There are none," Mr. Carson told them all, as vehicles were coming past the window, and around to the front. "The family are all making their way to the hospital." He tried Milo's case, expecting it to be light, and strained as he picked it up. "What have you got in here, Miss Ashby, lead?" the butler asked. Milo said nothing. It had been a good guess amongst other heavy metals. She did have some lead. "I can walk," she said, and made to take up her case. "I can take it for you," put in two voices. "I'll walk you," Alfred added. Jimmy, however, had lifted her bag. "No, no," Mr. Carson told them, "while that is most chivalrous of you, you are both needed here to prepare for Lady Mary's return." "I'll walk you," said Mr. Melsley, stepping next to Mr. Carson. "Mr. Crawley needs me at Crawley House. I'm going your way." With a strength that belied his frame, Melsley lifted Milo's case and began to walk down the hall and to the back door. "Goodbye," Milo said, to everyone. Jimmy and Alfred nudged one another, both miffed at missing out on a walk in the fresh air. "I'm glad you're my friend, Daisy," she added, "and you, Alfred, and you, Jimmy." She turned to Mr. Bates. "I am sorry for whatever I did to make you cruel to me." She cut off to look at Anna, and Mrs. Bates too. Maybe you could tell me one day. Then, she looked to Edna, but said nothing, and finally back to Mr. Carson. And I really will miss you most of all, Milo added, with sober reverence. I like the way you do things, all organized, all to the plan. She smiled, and then began to walk down the hall to Mr. Molesley. Mrs. Hughes? Milo stopped and called Downton's housekeeper to her. Yes? The money is for my clothes if you need the wardrobe for other things. I have nowhere else to keep them, no home here now. I don't need them for work, as I have clothes in Cambridge. She glanced to the door of her room. One of them is my blue dress. Would you send them on to me, when I have arranged where I can keep them? No, me Lucina, Mrs. Hughes told her with a warm smile, pushing the £5 note back into her hand. Those things of yours will remain there. You'll be in want of them when you next come back to visit. To visit Thomas? She prompted. Milo nodded. She was about to ask something else, but a shout from Mr. Molesley about missing the train caught her ear. Just before the door closed, the staff heard him say to Milo, "No, it is not an imposition, Miss Ashby. I need to go back to see my father. If you wouldn't mind, as we walk, could you explain it to me? What do I mean, everything? I mean, everything. I feel sorry for her having to listen to old Molesley," Mr. Carson told Mrs. Hughes, as he gave the servants their instructions. "Today, with what she is like, I feel sorry for him." Mr. Carson smiled. "A new baby on the way, and a young person going off to lead a new life. It's a good day, Mrs. Hughes, a good day." Elsie Hughes smiled. "And, now, don't say anything, Elsie, but I do just have to say that, against all probability, I'm going to miss Miss Ashby. I just can't see her coming back here again." Mrs. Hughes smiled again. "Oh, I don't know. She still has her house here, she still has Thomas. She still had her friends." Mrs. Hughes broke off as she saw several eager faces peering around the doorframe from the kitchen, looking at them. Mr. Carson gave them a brief smile, before striding towards them. "Now get back to work," he ordered them. "Mr. Crawley is coming back here tonight after he has seen his baby son. I want this place to be immaculate before he gets back." Mrs. Hughes smiled. Normal service had been resumed. For how long it would last, she pondered, was anyone's guess. 88,888,888. The Dowager, not expecting a car to arrive for her, signed her name at the bottom of the letter she was writing. Its contents were not detailed, it merely regretted to hear that Mrs. Jameson was now on the run with her 2 daughters and their manservant, all now sheltering with their once rivals, the Poundens, and that, should this get to them, they were to make it to Downton Abbey just as soon as they could. There, Violet Crawley thought. Don't let it be said that I ever buff as a hostess, although the length of stay of a refugee was of no small concern to her. But, the Jamesons had just been subjected to grand arson. Daphne Castle was in smoky ruins. Any arguments between the Poundens and the Jamesons were long past. And she reckoned that Margaret Miller, as was, had not changed a jot since she had known her, and would be managing their affairs with practicality and efficiency. The door opened, and Sprat stepped in. "Sprat, you are wanted at the hospital," he told her. "It's urgent." "Urgent?" the Dowager repeated. "What can be urgent? The baby is well, is he not?" Sprat betrayed nothing, and continued in his metronomic voice. "Nothing. But Lord Grantham has requested you attend." Violet Crawley nodded, and picked up the letter, folded it and pushed it into the envelope. "Be a dear, Sprat, and get this into the last post. It is rather urgent." She got to her feet. All this fuss over a baby. And yet ... he was the next generation, a wanted boy. Henry too, to Mary's Matilda. And Sprat. The Dowager called. Her butler turned and saw her ladyship smile. "I wish to give you the afternoon off. Back on duty by supper this evening." "Very good, your ladyship," Sprat replied. He offered the Dowager her coat, considering how much of an afternoon he would get when Lady Grantham got to the hospital. He looked at the letter, and placed it at the back of the mantelpiece. Better get on with his afternoon immediately. 88,888,888. The house was in chaos that evening. Cars were coming and going. Loud voices, doors slamming. Thomas, staring at the letters that formed his lover's father's name, closed his eyes again and waited. And was rewarded when, in the middle of the night, all sound ceased. It still hurt to move, but he was going anyway, going out of his room and down the back stairs and out into the yard and across the field to the sole place that gave him such comfort for so few years. In the end, sitting on the bed at the back, Thomas turned on the light. It was the first light that Ernest had fitted, under the supervision of his father. The first time he had seen the postgraduate electrician discussing lighting options with Lord Grantham. Thomas's heart beat faster beneath his dressing gown as he remembered that day, and laughed in his mind when he saw the tiny child refusing to leave her brother's side. Thomas did not know how long he sat there, reading the words, tears spilling from his eyes, sobbing at intervals into his arm, from sorrow, from happiness as he read his words, Ernest telling his father he was in love, true and deep and lifelong, and, knowing that he would not last much longer, knew that he needed to tell his father the content of his heart. True and deep and lifelong. Oh, how Thomas wished he could have been able to see Ernest one last time, to tell him that he too felt the same. As the sun lit through the crack in the door frame, their signal that Thomas had to return, reluctantly, from Ernest's arms and back to his life as footman. He got to his feet. Thomas folded Ernest Ashby's letter, putting it into his pocket, and then pushed out of the generator room and walked stiffly back towards Downton Abbey, ready now to find out about the latest drama. And, he realized, as he walked in the sun, that, as far as letters were concerned, Thomas Barrow was pleased to understand that the Duke's mother had been entirely wrong.